This week on New to You, Love for Sale, Part 4, Monster Hearts 2. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the New to You Show. I'm one of your hosts, John Holt. With me this week,
one of your other hosts, Keith Vincent, and
your other host, Julian Cage, and special guest,
Adam Mater,
for coming back for Part 4.
No problem. I still believe in love after so many weeks of just looking at the dark underbelly.
So we're getting to the end of February here, Adam. It's a short month.
Mm-hmm.
You got any music stuff on the horizon, you think, coming into March?
Elmsburg EP we're still working on it in the shop. Hopefully, maybe by the summer.
All right.
It'll be out.
Do you have any shows in the works?
Not yet. I'll probably be DJing on March 21st, though, at a newer place in Bushwick called Hollow, off the DeKalb stop. So, yeah.
How is that spelled?
The number 0 LO.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, we'll link to it when it's available.
DeKalb, in where did you say? In Greenpoint?
No, Bushwick. DeKalb.
Okay.
So, yeah, we're getting to the end. I guess we're Media Recommendation Review Podcast, New to You Show. Willkommen.
Yeah.
Let's get into my pick.
By the time they hit adolescence, most people have gotten over their fear of the dark. They spend their midnight hour on gushy phone calls, diary ramblings, and wet dreams. They sleep peacefully, assured that the shadows hold no monsters. But the shadows do hold monsters. You know because you're one of them. Wickedness dwells within your heart. Hunger courses through your veins. High school weighs on you, and teen drama puts you on edge. But you have power. What do you do next? The choice is yours.
My pick is a RPG game. The first iteration was designed in 2012, and the latest iteration was designed in 2017 after a little bit of a Kickstarter. It is based on, I'll kind of give you the previous iteration, there's a game system called Powered by the Apocalypse that was designed by Vincent Baker. The publisher is Lumpley Games for that, but he created a semi-cooperative storytelling game where you don't really roll against, the bad guys don't roll against you kind of thing. It's all about what your characters do, and the dice are there to add a bit of randomness, but mostly to just drive story points. And it's more about interactions with your characters, their choices, your characters and other characters, and the world. And so it's about kind of building a story together in a sort of class base. So you're given skins or classes, that are the archetypes.
Some people are in skins and they're against the people in shirts.
No, it's
That's
all
how you know
skins.
who's on, who's
All
off.
skins. So, Empowered by the Apocalypse, it's a post-apocalyptic, Mad Max world. And so you have people who are the driver, who is just the guy who drives trucks, and you may have skills towards that end. And the smuggler, the mercenary, the anarchist, just all these kind of weird, fun classes. And then it's about struggling together and against one another in this world, and having the DM or MC in these games is the one who basically just keeps asking you questions to draw the story in around you. And so gets you to pulls the story out of you and your characters, and then adds to it, and through consensus you guys start to build scenes and play out those scenes, and those scenes will lead to more questions, et cetera, et cetera. So Avery McDonaldo, she created this Monster Hearts game, which is what they call Powered by the Apocalypse, meaning that the base engine is using the same Apocalypse
Structure.
engine, of skins, and using 2d6s with some base, couple stats that just add to those. And 7, 8, 9 is a tentative success. 10, 11, 12, and up is a full success. And so if you have a full success, usually you gain something in addition to the success. If it's a tentative success, you may get what you want, but there'll be consequences. And then there's just failure, in which case there's just consequences. And those all are different ways. They're like ways the story branches is the way to think of it, rather than a failure or a full like success. Like it is a branch in the way the situation went. And you don't just say like, I'm going to search, roll for search. You say, I'm looking around and I'm trying to find what a blah, blah, blah. And that's when the MC might go, okay, cool. Why don't we're going to roll this to see if that's going to happen. Like you describe what you're doing. And if something jives with a move that you could do, then that's like a point, like a decision point where the path could diverge depending on what you do or don't succeed in doing. So you might find something, but it's bad for you to find, or may take things in a left turn. So the Monster Hearts game is about, and especially even more so in the second edition, is about being other and being different in like high school and in that like formative teen age. So you are playing in a high school, you are a bunch of teenagers, and just like a Twilight or one of those like archetypical
YA.
Yeah, like YA,
series.
like monster things. The teen wolfing out or whatever, or the being a vampire, like these things are like manifestations of your own like struggles in fitting in, or being attracted to people, or having desires and all these things, and going through changes, or being like feeling like you aren't connecting to people. And so there are actually what they call skins in this one that have different abilities and have different desires. So you have like the Chosen, who's like your Buffy the Vampire Slayer, who may have abilities and may be able to hunt out monster people. You have like ghosts, it's like someone who's died from unresolved trauma, who blames people, and
Moaning Myrtle.
yeah, but no one, like, it may be one of your secrets is that you're a ghost. People may not know that you are. You try to hide the fact that you go to school and you don't really interact with people physically very much. And that's like one of your secrets. And so there's aspects like the vampire, werewolf, witch, all these things. And then there are mortals who are vulnerable to all these things. And the mortal is actually someone who's kind of dangerous in that they trigger people who have secrets to become their darker selves. And so that's part of this game, is that you are tying yourself to other people with these strings. So when you do something to get something over on someone, like try to turn them on to get them to do something you want them to do, like by flirting with them or by some innocuous thing that you didn't mean to do, but they get turned on, then you get a little bit of like, you get a string to them. You get something that you can pull. You can interact with it to get more of what you want, or to more easily harm them if you want to. And then there are all these mechanics that are really, it's not so much about like combat, because when you have combat, it's like if you're going to fight somebody else, it's almost, again, to go back to like Buffy, it's more about the comments and the commentary between the punches and kicks that are the story. Like when Spike or Angel or one of her like super sex nemesis or whatever and her are fighting, what makes it harder for her to throw a punch or easier for her to get one over on them is when they say something to her that knocks her for a loop. Like, because they have a relationship. They're using that against her. And then in turn, she can do the same. Like she can turn their relationship against them and use that to get one over on them easier. So there's ways to succeed in that. So you're basically building these characters together and playing out their stories, and it's this tug of war. Like you also, like, you're playing a lot with sexuality. You don't have to be like heterosexual. You don't have to be homosexual. You can actually even be asexual in this game. Like it's all fluid and variable.
So there's a Morrissey class.
No, it's just more like you can kind of decide, like you can say what sexuality you have as your character. So
you can say I want Morrissey sexuality.
Sure, yes.
Asexual.
Well, asexual means more like you don't want to have sex, and so when someone tries to turn you on, it's actually more of a passive aggressive like maneuver, because they're basically like, I'm trying to turn this person on who clearly doesn't like want to do that kind of stuff. Doesn't mean they won't have sex as an asexual person, but it means that you're like you're doing something aggressive to them, like a microaggression or whatever, every time you try to like flirt with, because it's like it's not like you're tapping into a better, like something that they're interested in or is better for who they want to be.
But the game mechanics are all about relationships and and drawing out drama and conflict, like in terms of between characters' relationships.
Right.
And so they, yeah, that's good because it creates the incentive structure that helps everyone continue to engage in the story and with the other players.
Right. And the goal within this too is like to explore like queer concepts and queer content, and again, people who just don't know where they live on a spectrum. They don't know what sex is, let alone what their sexuality is, and so they have interplay with that. It could be that like you see some guy hitting on you as another male character, and they use the turned on, and that it does like register as a turn on to you, but that can be the reaction to that can be aggression. It could be that you are turned on by that and like have confusion, or like there's all these different ways that you can react to that based on who your character is.
And again, that reflects that idea that you're teenagers, so you don't yet know yourself fully, and so through the game you're discovering
Right.
who you are.
Could be a sexually confused werewolf.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Well, and I mean, or two, like let's say like
Or
a
a very
vampire is a
confident
simple
witch.
one. Like, when you eat people, when you drink their blood, do you see it as a sexual act? Like, or is it something, like, how does your character view that? Can be a question.
Is
And
there any other way to view that? I mean,
I know, right? But then the further question is, okay, so yes, let's say the question is yes, that it's like a very sensual like act and you find it to be very personal, as your character does. So then the further question is, okay, does it feel different when it's with boys or with girls, or based on whatever your character's like.
She's just
gender is.
eating all kinds of different people to see which
Right,
one is
oysters
most.
or snails. So, but the idea is like you are not like you are already presuming monstrosity to some degree and like otherness and differenceness, and then within that, like all the conflicts are normal though. You're just using the like monster analogies to like pull them out a little more and into sharper contrast.
Same way that like X-Men,
Right.
is a very like
Playing this game, you say it's all about relationships and whatnot, but if I don't know what limitations there are on what types of creatures, but let's just say werewolf because we
Mhm.
talked about it. If you're a character and you're like, hey, my guy's a werewolf and he's just going to eat all the cheerleaders, are there like consequences or
Yeah.
anything like this?
Well, because like there are sort of like four major tenets to the game.
And is the goal to kind of like maintain these characters over like several sittings of this game, or
That's the
what's
thing. The Apocalypse engine is built so you could play a session if you wanted to. And usually if you're doing that, things become a little more breakneck. The consequences are a little higher when you start to do things. Like your failures will be more explosive and your successes will be more impactful too. Excuse me. So that like another thing that can happen in Monster Heart specifically is that you awaken your darker self. So you wolf out, or you become a witch who is just blasting people with hexes and curses and like with impunity. And the one-off game, you may just stay that way until the end of the game or until you're killed. In a campaign, you may work or the other players may work to bring you out of that state, to bring you back to normalcy. And you see that you see that trope again.
What's normal? Hold.
Well,
Way to put these like
I mean,
put
back
me in a box.
back into more of a state of
normal for me may be being a werewolf.
no, it's more into a
Who are
state
you
of
to
imbalance.
judge?
Well, it's like the idea is if you're a werewolf who is on a rage tear and just eating people, then you aren't like you have no other possibilities.
Yeah, but see, I'm the kind of werewolf that plays basketball really well and rides the surfs on tops of vans.
That's what I'm saying. You wouldn't
are you to
have
stop me?
You wouldn't have those abilities in your darker self. You'd be the werewolf who's eating people.
Yeah.
But basically,
Styles ain't having
this
it.
sort of 4-part agenda for your characters that kind of bring it all to fruition is that make each character's life not boring. So sitting there and fighting something back and forth without like I want to hit him. Okay, I'm hit him again. I hit him again without saying like why are you hitting this person?
Yeah,
How
it's
do you
not
react to this thing?
evolving like the
Yeah, it's just
emotions
you're in
and
you're in a
story,
track. It's boring.
there's no drama.
So you want to.
Hitting somebody's drama.
Well, it's not drama if the person says, "Well, then I hit you back." Oh yeah, well then I hit you back, and then I hit you back, and then I hit you back. Like
Then
that's
I
not.
Just
I
Streets
hit
of
you with my
Rage
flaming
at that
sword.
point.
But it's not. That's just not like it's not advancing the story, so it just becomes dull.
In
Like
Streets of Rage, when that happens, you call on the special forces guys and they launch a bazooka.
And otherwise too, you just want to put your character in dangerous situations, or put them out there. You're playing characters who are central to a story. You don't want to be the wallflower who basically is set dressing the entire time. So that's kind of the thing. And then keeping the story.
Or if you choose to do that, then you have like a really exciting inner monologue.
Right. Exactly.
Like you're tormented because of this or that.
And then the other side is like they call it keeping the story feral. The idea that you are dialoguing with other players. So it's not about what the story is in your headcanon. It's about like, this is what my character feels. This is what I want to do in the moment, and reacting and interacting with what the other people are doing in the moment too. So that it's not just like, this is the story I have in my head for this session, for this character, and this is how it's going to play out. Because
This is what I planned at home, and
Right.
I'm going to bring it to the table.
Right. And basically it's just like,
Can you be a gym coach?
right, this is my private story.
Can
Yeah.
you be a bus driver?
Yeah. Why
Can
not?
you be the lunch lady?
What's the next?
The next tenet
What
is
if you're a lunch lady who's a witch?
they aren't allowed. They
Librarian?
have tests. No, you can't. They don't have libraries. Necronomicon.
Field hockey coach.
Yep. Two of those.
Swim coach.
No, there's no mermen in the game, or swamp lagoon monsters. So say what the rules demand is the next tenet. The idea being that the dice are there to create those shifts in the narrative, to give you something to react to that challenges everyone at the table. That it's basically there are moves that your character has, and those moves will trigger events, and those in turn can trigger reactions from the person running the rest of the game master, the MC.
And those strings that are things that like they're sort of like things you hold over somebody,
Mm-hmm.
or that somebody holds over you. Those also help define power dynamics between players.
Right.
And like right from the beginning, you automatically have something over another character, and so that it just gives you ideas for story and where to
Mhm.
go and how to make decisions.
Right. You wait, and like if you pick up the dice, if you're going to roll the dice, there's a reason you're going to do it, and you shouldn't ignore what the dice tell you just because you should use that as a challenge to say, what does this outcome mean for this scene for my character? So you shouldn't ignore it. And then last thing is say what honesty demands. And there's kind of two parts to this. One is open communication about what your player wants, about what the player's trying to do in the scene, so that there's more stuff for people to converse with and to interact with. And then also, what do you as a player want a little bit too, because you don't want it, you're dealing with stuff that can be pretty uncomfortable, like sexuality, et cetera, so you should dialogue about that as you're playing to like air that stuff so that people know like what not to pursue. For instance, like why keep going down this road if it's not something that me as a player wants to delve into, or at least not in that like abrupt way or something.
Right. So it keeps it fun for everybody.
Right. Also, the other kind of aspect of that, like I said, this is especially with like the MCs thing, is give information and just like don't be petty, go for the throat, but be honest about that. Like the example they give is like if someone werewolves out in the middle of a grocery store, people are going to freak out, people are going to die. Like it's going to happen. Like they're going to tear up people. And so they're going to be strong consequences of that, and you play that out based on what's there. Like because the character's fate in this story is in everyone's hands. And so that's the setup. So you just set up scenes, you play them scene by scene. They definitely say like, hey, you have cell phones, so you can still impact and interact with characters who aren't in your scene. Like you can text them, you can, leave messages for them, do stuff that activates those strings, that talk behind their back, which gives them like,
Well, you can do that without cell phones.
Mhm.
Am I right, guys?
but you can do like, you're just further interacting with the other people in the story. And so what we're talking about right now is like mostly the little stuff, like not little, but the like human interaction level. Then it becomes like hyper realized and elevated when the secrets are more that need to stay more hidden. Secrets are more monstrous, and that sort of thing. And so, like, again, parallel stories, like a Twilight example, you have your like trifecta of the love triangle between these three characters. The girl who is lusted for and lusts after two people with secrets, and that interaction and the danger that she puts herself in and that they put themselves in interacting with her. And so that those power dynamics, and then basically like the fact that you're always playing with fire.
See, the thing I like about, I don't know about new D&D, but old D&D is there were kind of rules to keep the DM in check. Like the DM couldn't just say, oh yeah, you know what, it's 1,000 goblins and blah, blah, blah. Like, what's to keep this DM from picking on people, or
Well,
the MC?
That's one of the tenets, is like to be honest with your players in the setting. Like you're gonna
but honest by what by whose
by
standard?
honest by the tables.
Honestly,
because
a wolf could wolf out a person could werewolf out in the grocery store and not really kill anybody if it just runs out. You know what I mean? Like,
then you discuss that. Like then it would be a conversation. Like the other side is its consequences. As the MC, you could say, look, if you fail this roll, like you're going to make this move. This is a turning point for your character, as I see it. If you
you're going to ask Susie on a date,
right, or you're going to you're going to do something dangerous with your character in the middle of this grocery store, and you're on the razor's edge here. If you wolf out, there are going to be consequences. If you wolf out and it goes bad, then you could hurt somebody. If you wolf out and
just eat a bunch of
and
steaks,
it's like so, you might be able to get out of here, but people are going to have witnessed this. So you have an option, and if you succeed, you might be able to avoid conflict. So there's like, you give them the choice, and then they can have those paths, and you're being honest with them about that. And if they're like, oh, well, what about this? You say, okay, well, let's discuss that.
But I think that the main difference, though, between this and D&D is that, like, D&D is sort of like quest and goal focused and improving your character, whereas here it's much more of like first of all, the spirit of it is very much like campy and melodrama, like think CW,
Right.
like show, that kind of thing.
Vampire Diaries.
And then also it's much more of like a improv, yes, and kind of spirit behind it, whereas it's less about arguing with each other with somebody, and everybody's just trying to just have fun and create a fun story.
Right. And also, it's not so much like the DM's going to say.
And what are the DMs called? The DMs aren't.
These are called.
MC.
They're called GMs in Powered by the Apocalypse, and they're called MCs in this.
Mm.
So I guess maybe that follows with Masters of Ceremony. I forget what the acronym is, but the idea is that you, instead of saying like, oh, there's a bunch of goblins, or like, oh, the cops show up kind of thing and beat you up and there's 1,000 cops, you would instead say like, okay, what class are you in? Like you ask the questions and pull the scene out of the players. Like you're asking them like, what scene are you in? Or what class are you in? Okay, where do you sit in the class? And then maybe you throw a curveball, oh, you guys are dissecting frogs today, and the smell of blood is overwhelming, or the smell of the formaldehyde and the dead frog is like just setting you
bringing
off.
back Frankenstein flashback.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So then then they talk about it, and you have, you could get a stigma for being that kid who ran out of class puking or whatever, like, because there are social consequences in the game as well as sort of like monster related consequences, and those are all aspects that you're playing in. And so that's, as a GM, that's the stuff you want to pull.
And the system just creates that because it's like there's no stats, there's no, you don't.
I mean, there's limited
experience.
stats.
Right. Like very, very limited. But
So there is experience, and you get an experience when you fail. So anytime you fail a roll, you gain an experience. And what happens is you tick 5 of those boxes, and you can like do stuff. You can like gain a move, which means you gain like more abilities or more like things you can do in the game, like sneak or whatever, like things that make sense. Or you can even increase your stats, which are like basically when you roll 2d6, the stats may just add themselves to that roll. So, you may have a high vitality, you may have a 3 or 4. And so that means when you roll something that is attached to one of those few stats, then you just get a little bonus if those stats are higher. But really, those stats you don't roll dice a whole lot. And only players roll dice. The GM never rolls a die in the game.
Yeah, and I listened to, not all the way through, but I listened to some of the podcasts of people playing that you had posted. And I also found another like set of players, like a different game on YouTube, and both were really like very like fun and high spirited, and everybody was kind of like nobody was taking it too seriously.
Right.
It was really just like, oh, this is like a lot of laughter because all the scenarios are over the top and ridiculous, and all the characters are, melodramatic, and everybody's just kind of like getting into that spirit.
Right.
And the both games had very different flavors and different kind of players, but it still somehow like had the same kind of vibe. So I think it works or whatever.
Yeah. And then zooming out, the designer Avery McDonald, and I'll kind of hand it over to you guys from here. She is basically likes to explore interaction. So they have a game called Quiet Year, which is like a map game where you create an environment of people, and the exploration is not that you're playing an individual, but you're playing a group of people with a mindset in this map game in like a post-apocalyptic single year. And that's a game. And the other one she has is Ribbon Drive. Your people on a road trip towards a specific goal, and the constraints are that you figure out what the road trip is about and your characters based on some of the first couple songs on the mixtape that you listen to. Everyone brings a mixtape. Then
A real mixtape
to the game. Then you play and you let the songs color the scenes that you tell, and it's all about character interaction and dialogue, and the conflict comes from you throwing obstacles in front of each other a little bit, like, and again they will be road trip related, and then your characters have futures, things that they look forward to, and it's about discussing those futures, and the protagonist becomes the character who no longer cares about their futures. So they're the one.
Did you play that on Board Ghost?
We
Okay,
have
that's- I was like,
and
why
so
is it so
they're the
familiar?
ones who lose. They're the ones who lose the thread. They become the protagonist in the center because they're the ones who are no longer on
track.
the road trip. They're no longer on a forward linear path. They've diverted, and so then it becomes about they're the one who the story is about, and then the story closes. And so Avery also has a few games about like being queer and those interactions, like in a post-apocalypse setting, like, or like just kind of pulling it out and twisting it. And the second version of Monster Hearts, one brought that like exploration of sexuality and like the parallels of being other to being queer, and also made strings more central, because the strings are important, but they just weren't as clearly focused and defined in the first edition as in the second edition. Yeah, and that's the basics on Monster Hearts. And yeah, her design philosophies are pretty interesting. There's quite a few talks she has online, and yeah, I would check out Buried Without Ceremony is the name of her design company. What are your thoughts, Adam?
Well, I am very inexperienced in this field, but no, it sounds
Except
interesting.
he did go to high school.
Yeah,
I did go to high school. Felt monstrous at times. So like, what keeps? I understand it's like it feels very lighthearted and like not taking it too seriously. What helps keep you invested in the game emotionally with what happens? You know what I mean? Like, or does it? And it's okay if it feels more like an improv exercise, I guess. But
yeah, I think that like there are enough basic, like your skin that you put into like the initial skin of your character,
Mhm.
and the questions you ask and answer about your character, that becomes your initial investment.
Mhm.
And then as you play, it's those binding strings, things
Right.
that you hold over other characters, things that they hold over you, that start to like, basically the investment becomes in like furthering the narrative.
Right.
And again, keeping it like fresh and alive.
Mm-hmm.
And
What's the timing structure? How do you know when the game is beginning or ending, or just
It
you-
can
you
be-
just define it together?
Yeah, 'cause it's not a quest like Jules was saying.
right. Yeah, I think that what you would want to do is like I'd imagine a solid MC would try to find some sort of like inciting action that either comes from outside or is part of a clock built within the character's arc for the game. And so you'd say, okay, within this game setting, based on the character conversations, I want to throw this many obstacles out, and I want to increase the stakes by this much, and try to have a confrontation by the end of the second act or the beginning of the third act, and a denouement and a closure that brings us to like, so as the MC, that's your challenge. Like the players are interacting with each other and you, and they're supplying, like, that's where these kind of games are really fun. Like, I've run games where you don't, it's almost a hindrance to have like a whole printed out map and a whole like book of all the possible things that you could do and the stat lines and blah blah blah. If you just have like a bullet point list of this sandbox that everyone's playing in, and they're supplying you with the details, like, what's the name of your homeroom teacher, and they say the name of their homeroom teacher, and she's your character now. And you can say what she looks like, and they can add details, and there you go. Now you have this character, and they can become as important or as necessary as you need. Like, they can come and go as needed, and you can decide how important they are to this character interaction.
Yeah,
and their importance is really how much do they drive the movement of the story and these other, and what the characters want to have happen and the players want to have happen with their character.
Yeah, and in a lot of the examples I saw, you're leaning heavily on like narrative tropes and cliches, but again, because it's in the spirit of this kind of camp spirit, so it makes it easy to kind of, it's a little paint. It can be like in terms of driving the story and having an arc, it can be a little paint by numbersy. Like, again, just kind of because it's like we've seen all these kind of teen dramas like so many times. If you're kind of seeped in pop culture, I think everybody kind of instinctually kind of can feel, okay, like we've accidentally stumbled into this kind of trope, like let's go in that direction. And that's kind of how it very easily happens. I mean, the podcast in particular, they literally, like, the premise was that this is like a CW show based on mummies,
Right.
and so with that idea in mind, then everybody knew, oh, okay, like this is the type of stuff that happens on these shows, and this is the kind of like story arc you're dealing with, and all that kind of stuff. And they went so far as to create like season 1 backstory, and now this is season 2 for episode 1.
Does
like
Brendan
kind of
Fraser show up?
that kind of stuff, totally that kind of stuff. Like,
He's someone's prom date. How'd you find out about the game, Holt?
Like, I'm a pretty big fan of Vincent Baker, the designer.
Mhm.
And so I've kept an eye. Like, he created this game called Dogs in the Vineyard, which was in the 2004. It's pretty, actually, I mean, for these kind of indie RPGs, it's about, like, loosely based on the Mormon history.
Oh, wow.
And the whole premise is like, you are these, like, they call them God's watchdogs, dogs,
Mhm.
who go from Mormon settlement to Mormon settlement, and are like an adjudicator.
Okay.
You settle disputes and meet punishments and meet consequences.
Yeah.
And you are giving new interpretation, delivering the mail, but they have, like, you're almost like a traveling pope kind of thing, like
Okay.
slash like lawman, for like the law being the like tenets of the faith
Mhm.
in this like new religion. The mechanics for resolution are really elegant, and people will use them in other game systems like this. There's a Legends of the Five Ring, which is like a samurai, like a Edo era kind of thing, but they'll play with that
Same structure.
that same like rules mechanic, but using, the samurai as the adjudicator. And it's more about like negotiation and coming to a consensus point, or a point of like completion of that conversation, to then mete out the justice as needed, and then move on to the next scenario. So again, he's a designer who I followed for a while, and then Apocalypse World like was pretty big on the scene. Like, there are, I want to say, like, where was the thing? I just saw someone like listed out a bunch of the powered. Basically, there are a bunch of things that are powered by the apocalypse.
Yeah.
So you've got, like, at least at this point almost 24 things that are powered by the apocalypse, and then there are ones that are started powered by the apocalypse and like
branched out.
have branched a little bit.
Mhm.
So there's Apocalypse World, which is the
It's
base.
kind of like the equivalent of the board game equivalent to the Unreal Engine
Yeah.
in video games.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So like Dungeon World is a fantasy version of this kind of thing. Monster of the Week is quite like it's Monster of the Week. You're playing as, and I think the Adventure Zone guys are doing this right now in they're using the Monster of the Week system as one of their like short series games on that podcast. And it's exactly what it is. You are a series of people who are ostensibly investigators / curious hunters dealing with the week's monster, like an X-Files or a Fringe or any of these, pretty common trope. And then another big one, Spirit of 77, is like 70s action movie, like Bullet, Kung Fu, all that kind of like crazy stuff. The Warren is another big one, and it's like Watership Down. So it's like you're
Mhm.
all rabbits dealing with living in a dangerous world for rabbits. And those are
Is
just
there
like
an Animal Farm one?
not yet. You want to make one? There's one called Masks, which is superheroes. Yeah, there's all kinds.
There've been a lot of. Oh, you mean Masks is based on the post-apocalypse one?
It's powered by the apocalypse. That's the engine, and the
Right.
system
Okay.
is like your teenage superheroes.
Yeah.
And so it's about being like, again,
Probably a turtle, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
one that has been blasted by ooze.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So those are just a handful of them. There's one all about people who are dragons and stuff. So tons of different versions of the game. And then there are games that have launched from that game, like Blades
So the
in the Dark.
monster one, getting back to the one that you're talking about, the Monster Hearts. So it's not like so it's when you get started, it's not like, hey, free for all, you get to be a zombie, you get to be a whatever, you get to be. It's almost like it's kind of established at the beginning, like you said, it was like Jules said in the example of the podcast episode. It was, hey, we're doing mummies.
Well, no, that was like the theme of the show, but within that, everybody, I think there are set roles.
They're
right?
they're called, those are the skins.
Yeah.
But
So
you
you sort of are cast, like you're the whatever.
right. Well, but
You're the
similar
chosen. You're the.
similar to generating the characters.
Is there a manic pixie dream girl?
Sure, the queen. No, the you could define the mortal as having those qualities, like or the fae could have those qualities. It's really about how you kind of take the personalities of that skin and start to like adjust the tropes to fit the character you want to play. And
Yeah, so each person gets to. I mean, just like in D&D, you get to define your character.
And the like setting up a scenario like that, where like this is our play set. We're living in a season 2 of a monster world with mummies in it. That's
It's like the flavor. There's like
it's like building building constraint,
stuff.
right?
Mhm.
And
Context, so that
Right.
people are on the same page when they start.
but you can do that. You can do that conversationally as well. Like there are a series of questions, like small town is what like you can. There are some preset small towns, and there are questions to get to. Like what is this location we're in? What is the demographics? What are the is this a big town? Or is it?
Is it
Are
in
we
Alaska
classic?
or Texas?
Yeah, are we the classic like Pacific Northwest small town in the woods, semi-rural, not too far from a major but not too crazy city, kind of thing with lots of woods and lots of nature and a high school of a couple thousand kids? Or like what is this world we live in? Like and you just instead of having one person who prescribes that, you puzzle that out by asking questions and getting those answers. And then that builds everything for people, and you may find stuff that everyone's in agreement on and helps you like build out like, okay, this is the structure that we're going to hang our characters from and go from there. Like these are some of the larger tensions in this world. These are, this is not a racially diverse town, and so it adds to your character's issues if they have, if they are a minority in this town, on top of being a fairy or a ghoul or an infernal who's made a pact with a demon to have some powers. Like these are all things that you can complicate the characters' lives with and find ways to like give them a grounding in the scenario. And you could play it as like, you can be as melodramatic as you want and go and lean camp, and you can also play as like, try to keep it as straight as you want, kind of thing. And again, you don't want to be boring though, so you want to find ways to explore these things, and you have supernatural stuff going on, so it's going to get big at some point, or at least seem big because you're all in high school and everything's.
So how does a turn work? Is it turn based? Like
It's scene based. So what the MC's other role is to make sure that if this is your scene and you're the focus of it, that if other characters jump into the scene and it makes sense for them to, that you're going to answer and interact with that they're going to interact together and it makes sense. And the MC may, like, they're the arbiter. They would say, no, you can't hop in yet, but one sec, I think there's a way to fold you in. And you might find that where it works. And so it's kind of like, again, it's a give and take. There's a conversation to that too. And then the MC's goal is to find, like, the scene may not even totally come to a conclusion before it makes sense to jump to another character and see how they're dealing with the consequences of this scene or what they're doing in the meanwhile. And you might jump back to this character, but you want to make sure the MC is really trying to make sure everyone gets their moment of highlight. Like they're like spotlight, spotlight, spotlight. okay, it makes sense to jump back to you, and then I'll jump back to you, and now I need to jump back to this person. Like you watch the room, watch where the story's going, and make sure that everyone is invested and involved in it. So that's kind of the challenge for them, and that's why they want to lean on the players to give them as much as they can to help like push them forward.
It's interesting because all the games I've played, I watched or listened to or whatever, I think everybody was very experienced. So everything seemed like really seamless. So maybe it kind of like made it look easy. They made it look easy in a way, maybe.
Well, the other thing too, like the powered by system is pretty
Yeah.
robust and it's pretty simple. And so instead of saying like, I don't know, what stat do I need to do this? You just say, oh, they do this and they do this. And the MC could say, okay, cool. Then this happens, but then what about this? And you could answer the question, or the MC could go, oh, okay, that's going to be pretty hard. Why don't you're going to use this move, and then consequences to follow. It's like the system is built to play pretty smoothly, and
Yeah, it's kind of
you
there
don't
when
need
you.
to roll dice very often.
Yeah, it's like it's there when you need it, and then it disappears when you don't. It's kind of
All
how
right,
it's felt.
here's the deal. If we ever play this, it's got to take place in the Porky's High School
Oh, nice.
during
a
the
lot of-
Porky's time.
A lot of hanky-panky going on.
It doesn't have to be hanky.
Well, we already
panky.
talked. All right, so it's this Black Pig or Black
Black-
Mirror
Black Mirror.
national anthem. Is that what?
Oh, no.
Nothing but trouble. Well,
Yeah. That would fit right in with the Porky's
Yeah.
universe. Nothing but trouble.
I think too, like the other aspect that this is the challenge with like story games too, is that the designer is very aware and wants to like make people like recognize you're playing a game, and you're like she kind of has said too, the reason why we play these kind of games is to practice being people, like practice being a human. Like the reason you play any RPG, whether it's a video game that's like RPG thing or tabletop, the goal is to like, you're practicing playing a human. You're putting yourself into situations where you're doing something. And if you're going to practice being a human who goes and kills everybody and is a murder hobo in D&D, that's a choice. Like that's a choice you want to play out, and you can,
Ooh, Hobo High School.
yeah.
Mm.
But like the classic,
Wait,
like,
what?
So it's a high school full of hobos, and some of them like
Hobo or homo?
hobos.
Hobo.
Hobos like
I mean, some of them could be.
Boxcar
Homo
Jenkins
hobos.
is coming. Boxcar Jenkins is back in town. He's got a pocket full of the hobo nickels. And
Will he win the big game?
Will he get some fresh hot pie off the windowsill?
Yeah, we'll get a coffee for a nickel. But the idea is that in the game, you should be like increase awareness of other people, increase awareness of, and be aware of like, are you like not confronting difference and not confronting like racial stuff because you don't know it, or because it's not comfortable, and talk about that and get to that and figure it out. And that's really like a lot of this game is about using it to, and the trappings of monstrosity, to challenge yourself and talk about otherness and being different. Like, so for some people, this otherness doesn't end with high school's awkwardness and weirdness, and they don't they don't figure it all out.
Listen, Holt, as a left-hander, I don't need a freaking game to show me how it is to be different, okay? Every time I swipe my Metro card, I'm reminded of how this world wasn't meant for me.
It is a right man's world.
It is.
Oh no, you're just supposed to step backwards into it, Keith. It's ambidextrous, man.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be walking out of the subways. You're not allowed to use our stations.
Yeah,
You
that's
freak.
right. You're the only
You mutant.
The only train you should be on is the train to the camps. Where all you left-handed freaks go.
Don't even need to swipe on them.
I'll give you a free ride to
Stand clear of the closing doors.
Yes.
So they
We're
do
playing
have left-handed
redneck.
monsters in this game?
You can say your monster is
All
left-handed.
all left-handed people are monsters.
I know, that's
so,
what I'm saying.
We're playing redneck high school.
Oh man.
Uh,
Too
Where
much.
everybody's
Too much
named
of
Travis.
Too much of
Everything's
America's playing redneck
here,
high
if you know what I mean.
but yes, so
Playing Mass Shooter High School.
what a beautiful sensitive game for you monster people. But yeah, so
You haven't learned a thing.
The game is available through Buried Without Ceremony. I think it's available on like maybe Drive-Thru RPG is a place to get PDFs for it. I think you can buy it on Buried Without Ceremony on PDF, and you can get the hard or paperback version as well on the internet.
Or you can like read a review and be like, oh, I get it. I can do that.
I could do this.
Yeah. But the
Hobo High School, here I come.
But the rule set's like, like how to generate scenes and sort of like jumping off points. There's a lot of good information in the rule book. So
Now, have you ever heard of anybody using a game like this, or like any of the ones in the that you named
Powered-
off to kind
powered
of like
by
write
whatever.
scripts?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
Yeah, all the time, man.
yeah, totally.
Yeah. Did it 3
there's
times the other day.
That's how we came up with
Yeah.
this podcast.
exactly. No, I'm trying to think of like ones where they definitely did it. I know like Fiasco playset had like there's a whole companion book about like how to use it as a writer and like gaming story, that kind of stuff. So I don't know about the powered by stuff, but there are definitely games where people have like theorized or kitted them for story. And I feel like there are a couple like I'm blanking, but there are a couple instances of either like TV shows or,
Oh
or
yeah,
books.
Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Mm.
hmm Tolkien was a big time dice thrower.
Well, it's just that, but in seriousness, I mean, I've been in a lot of projects with some of the people in this room, where we're all trying to like conceive this idea at the same time, but it always kind of ends up being like, okay, great, and then somebody goes off and writes it on a script. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it'd be really neat to either use a system like this or customize a system of sorts, whatever it is, be it based on anything like this or not, but would allow to kind of like play out a scene, and it's just like perfect. Let's write that down. You know what I mean?
yeah, I mean, that's what.
Like a true collaboration.
Well, the like Hickman and
Weiss and Hickman.
yeah, the Dragonlance series was a campaign that they played and codified and wrote into novels and made into a playset.
I also learned that the Expanse, that sci-fi series, was also started as a RPG campaign
Wow.
that 2 friends then turned into
Yeah.
a book.
So I think that what you usually find with these games is that, it's a lot of raw material, and then it's like there's a lot of it's raw material where there's a lot of things figured out already, but you still need to get in there and edit. There may be choices made that need to go a different way for the story to like really have a strong act structure versus like how it plays out in a 4-hour back and forth conversational session.
Yeah, but I mean, even in the most perfect writing room scenario, you're still going to have that situation where it's just like, yeah, well, we got to get this into a better structure, and you know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
So
I mean, again, it's the
Yeah, I think
same.
it's a good starting point.
It's I don't know, like we sat for hours and did arcing for Speed Racer, and it was like 4 of us, like 4 people just hashing out, or 5 people just hashing out like 26 episodes of like what could happen next. And we built a world and then we like there's games like that, like world, but there's
yeah,
tons
so
of
imagine if you had kind of constructed a system similar to this, where you could be like, okay, boom, you are this person, these are the goals of the season. You are this person, you are this person, you are this person. How do we get there? I don't know. I just that's inspiring to me. That's all.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I'll leave it at that.
idea.
The possibilities.
I know Volvo's looking for a campaign that does that.
Mm.
So
Yeah, because teens love buying cars.
That's right. V is for vampire.
Especially- Mom, I want a Volvo. And they're especially looking for safety in
Yeah.
their vehicles.
Yeah.
That's what teens really care about.
There's this movie on Netflix called A Man Named Ove, and it's about takes place in one of the northern European countries. But he's like so anti Audi, and he's so Volvo. Like that's
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Oh, I think I've seen it, or I've seen the little
And he says
thing for it.
there's a funny joke where he says Audi, they got 4 zeros on the front of the hood and 1 behind the wheel.
Burned.
But he says it in another language, so it sounds really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So that's any other thoughts on Monster Hearts?
How do you see it fitting in Love for Sale?
I think that
You love the game and you bought it?
I bought it. I think that it's more like
capitalist.
it's like an exploration of like, because it's teen passion but also relationships, and it's a simulation game like about telling stories about people navigating those waters.
All right,
And
I buy it.
so yeah, the love for sale aspect is that someone can generate and commodify this experience, like that you can go and purchase this simulator and play it. But
Over
like
and over until you reach 98
Yeah.
points.
so you reach nirvana. But the idea is that it's like, that there are games like there's one called Hearts Ablaze, which is like a maybe 3 or 4 player like sci-fi relationship game. There are games like Lasers and Feelings, which is like there are all kinds of relationship games. Some are just board games. Like there's a really good 2-player one called And Then We Held Hands, which is
Is there
about
a game called Relationship Ship where
Yep.
it's like relationships on a ship?
There's one
And
called
maybe you're pirates, maybe you're sailors.
Rabbits.
There's one called Bride the Game. It's a board game about getting the wedding dress, becoming a bride. There is that.
Love it.
No, but there are all these games that bring you to like an exploration or understanding of human interaction, and it's something where people have put in the time and effort, and you can purchase these things and do the same thing. Put in the time running the simulation, playing the game yourself. There you go.
And hopefully you love it.
Yeah.
And you buy it.
Good pick.
Thanks.
Good work.
Have you played it other than for the podcast?
I haven't played it for the podcast. I played it for like fun. But
Oh, cool. How many times have you run through
just like once and a half,
Okay.
something like that. So I played Powered by the Apocalypse or
Other
Apocalypse
Powered by the
World more. So
And you definitely played the one with the road trip.
right, yeah, I played a couple of her other games. Yeah,
The idea to take Twilight and Apocalypse World and mash them up started as a joke. That sounded ridiculous to me. And I was writing joke mechanics on the Apocalypse World forum, and then someone, I think it was Shreyas Sampat, who's a cool game designer as well, said that sounds amazing. You actually need to do that. And then I kind of tilted my head and I looked at it and I was like, you know what? Actually, the more I like tease this joke out, the more it seems like it should actually just be a game.
Such a question, there are many possible answers, such as hard work.
Feel I'm alone in this whole of existence. I know it takes time, but I'm losing my persistence. The distance is too far to fetch, so I sketch on pages and hope that some catch the thoughts of my.
hey everybody, thanks for listening to another episode of the Interview Show. I was John Holt. You can find me on Twitter at Lord Joho and on Instagram at board_ghost, and you can find my RPG podcast at boardghost.com and my book club podcast at woundandstab.com. Keith, where can people find you?
People can find me on the internet at earthlingkeith.com. And how about you, Julian?
You can find me on Twitter or Instagram at Beautiful Jewels. And how about you, Adam?
You can find me at adamator.com.
Nice. Oh, and Adam, what was new to you this week?
So I saw a documentary.
No.
Jules.
Yeah.
I am not a documentary person. It's called Northern Disco Lights. It's about the explosion in the last like 2 to 3 decades of dance music in Norway. Yeah, it does a really great job of showing like, I think Scandinavia to Americans feels like the same thing, sort of like slightly different flavors, but it Norway is a little bit of like the weirdo one. Like Sweden is like the perfect like honor roll / like jock or whatever of like everything just goes right for Sweden. Denmark's a little more like rebellious and weird, but like still like very successful. And Norway was always sort of just this like, I mean Finland too, I think, but like Norway is sort of it's like the rejects the way they describe it. Like in this town. It's like north of the Arctic Circle. I forget what it's even called. But all these, a couple of these like young guys in the 80s started to like really get into, I don't know how they'd like go to London and buy like dozens of records or like get this one radio station from like Bergen or Oslo and start hearing like, Detroit techno or Chicago acid or house or whatever music. They got into that. They'd get into disco a little bit. They got into like all sorts of like 80s like synthy pop and stuff. And they'd would start having these like warehouse parties because they describe it, it's like very cold, very dark most of the year, nothing to do. That tradition carried on to the 90s, and then there was this like explosion around turn of the century when like with like Royksop. Annie was a singer who had a really successful worldwide album. And
She
then
was from Norway?
hmm
Oh, get out.
yeah, and Royksop produced half her album. Oh, there are a couple others. I'm forgetting the other hits from that time. But yeah, then it traces it to like the last decade. There's been this guy who Hans Peter Lindstrom, who just goes by Lindstrom, and he has a lot of like just crazy like 8 minute long. It feels like Giorgio Moroder, but like an update on that. Like obviously the technology is way better, and like those sort of like 8 minute long, like they call it like space disco, and it's just it's like very kitschy and like tongue in cheeky, but also like legitimately well made and produced dance music, so you can like sounds great in club. And then finally like kind of the biggest star right now, I never really know how to pronounce his name, Todd like Terje. So Todd and then Terje. He had a huge album. He always sort of like released singles for the last like 12 years or so, and he had this big album that was more or less like taking most of these singles and putting it together, called It's Album Time. And that came out in I think 2013 or 14. I think 14. Many of the songs had been released already as singles, but one song featuring Brian Ferry on vocals. Most of his stuff's instrumental, but he had a cover actually of a Robert Palmer song with Brian Ferry on vocals. Is very good. And that album just like blew up for him, and he had this massive hit called Inspector Norse that is just a really feel good, like it's like a 7 minute, again, like disco song. That it was just like for like being an instrumental, like a huge hit. It almost reminds me of like first Daft Punk album, where like some of those songs either barely had vocals or had none at all, and were like would play on MTV. So yeah, all the stories, like all the different characters are great. They do a great job weaving it chronologically, and like it's funny because it looks like pretty bad at first too. Like when they have VHS clips of those first parties in the late 80s and 90s, and it's like really weird, pale, pasty or skinny white dudes trying to dance to this crazy like early like jungle music and stuff, like just crazy like Prodigy style like music, and it just looks like it's like painful to watch at first almost. It's like like watching a bunch of geeks rocking out, but it's cool to find them like they like get really good at the technical aspect of it, and they're such like they totally love the music, and yeah, end up making like some really amazing stuff for such a small country. So
it's kind of just tracing the development of this scene in Norway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because there are just like at least in like electronic or dance circles, just a weirdly high number of Norwegian artists now, and they of course like almost all know each other, and I thought it was really well done and just like really nice and quick, and soundtrack's amazing. It's on Spotify. There's a soundtrack for it.
Cool.
Very good. So
And what's the title again?
Northern Disco Lights, and you can rent it on Amazon Prime and iTunes.
Nice.
Cool. And what drew you to it? Just the
I like I've loved Lindstrom for like ever since he had this one single I called I Feel Space in 2005. That was like his big sort of like entrance to the world. I remember hearing that in college. He's had lots of good albums and singles and stuff since then. And then Todd Terje or whatever was when that album came out and he sort of blew up. I became more aware of like the scene behind it, and it's funny because you come across in electronic music a lot of like German and Swedish and Norwegian artists or Belgian or Dutch or something, and the names you sort of just like stop even thinking about them, and then going back I'm like, oh wow, like all these guys, because the names can still look sort of similar,
Right.
the surnames and stuff, and
Yeah.
you don't realize where they're from. And I was like, wow, like almost all these guys are from Norway. Like,
wow.
yeah, it was pretty cool. I always love when like weird anything, whether it's like in sports or arts or technology or something, like these small places, societies or whatever have just like a disproportionately high number of like really good. I mean, I think like there's this like one island or something in the Caribbean that has like 20 major league shortstops or something. Like it's just insane. Like really weird stuff like that happens in the world, and it really has that feeling too, because it's just like such a good. I mean, these people had like no other way to like party and have fun, and
Like Kenyan runners, like
yeah,
distance
exactly,
runners,
like Kenyan Canyon Runners is a great example. Really fun. Or I think like in the olden times there'd be like a bunch of like violinists from one place in Austria or something weird like that. Like that's my
Sweet.
recommendation. Check it out.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
check
check
that out. It's funny because it might have been the last time you were here, but one of the most recent times you were here, you were talking about it was a
Or like the
Yeah, we
Kings
did
of
talk-
Convenience guy.
no, the guy Ireland or
Erland Oy.
Ireland.
yeah, Ireland.
I think
Oy.
he's Norwegian too. I could be. They mentioned Kings of Convenience, which
Yeah.
is a duo he was in.
And
Yeah,
I
and then
really
he
got
worked with
into them since
Royksop.
the last time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember you mentioning Royksop in that.
What's
as
funny is
well.
they don't talk about Royksop a lot in this documentary. I don't know if that's because Royksop chose not to participate, or they're like kind of so much more like conventionally popular than everyone else.
Mm.
Because even Annie was like a pop artist, but she wasn't like top 40 in America at least.
Right.
I think in England she's probably fairly big, but like yeah. So yeah, no, it's a lot of cool like again like it's a lot of deeper music. Some of it's I mean like Lindstrom and his sometimes partner he collaborates with Prince Thomas. They'll sometimes just decide to like let's make an album that's I don't know more like African music or something. They'll like do kind of anything outside of just the sort of space disco lane that they've carved for themselves.
Do they ever like? Because there's a bit less. Is there also like a big Norwegian death metal scene? Right.
I think so.
I wonder
I've-
if they ever like cross path. I've heard like some chip tune, like almost
oh really?
like death metal weird stuff.
That's yeah. They didn't talk about the death metal stuff. They talked about how Aha was such a huge moment for Norway, which like of course as Americans we don't think about, but like yeah, that was like the first like big crossover artist.
International.
Yeah, Norway was like a weird country because it wasn't very prosperous or anything until I think they found like a ton of oil or something, probably in the middle of the 1900s, and then all of a sudden it became this like wealthy country and became a little more like global and business oriented. But it was a cool little, and also like all the shot like there's a lot of like drone footage of the landscape, and it's just like yeah, it's crazy. It's just like a snow desert.
Yeah.
Do they still hold festivals and events?
Yeah, they have a lot of music festivals there. So yeah, it's kind of cool. It made me like want to go to one of them sometime. Like it seems. I think I weirdly too, through the creepiness of Google and Amazon, got like a recommendation in like an email or something like that, where it's like, or maybe it's Facebook, where it's like, check out this festival in Oslo or wherever in May, and I'm like, oh, it's so weird. I knew I like watched this documentary, and who knows?
That always creeps me out when it's
The
just like,
cookies.
oh, you were looking at shoes.
Well,
Check out these shoes.
I was gonna
It's just
say
like,
it could have been too, because I was listening to the soundtrack to this documentary, and then they're like, "Oh, you just listened to 10 straight Norwegian artists. Here's this festival in Norway," like, which is still like a little weird too. But yeah, that's the internet for you.
Yeah.
Creeps.
And so again, that's on iTunes and Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
That's right.
All right. Thanks, Adam.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks again
you
for
guys.
being on.
Of
Yeah.
course, yeah.
Good
Thanks for
having
having me.
been here a whole month. It's awesome. All through February.
Yep, just camping out. I have my
Yep.
beard down to my ankles now. Yeah.
Kind
All
of
right.
stinky.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right, gang. That's it for Love
That's
for
it.
Sale.
Next week we are covering something new.
New topic next week.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that. Go to our website to learn more.
We shall not
Yes.
speak of it now.
It
no.
is not a real thing yet.
Oh, we do not know what it will be.
But hey, next week it'll probably be, well, it may not be new to you next week,
Yeah.
but maybe it's new to you
Floating out.
It's all about the music. This pitiful life is 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 all about the music.
Be with him together forever, without the limitation of time ever again. So the second coming of the Lord is not dead.